Okay, welcome to this playlist where we're going to be looking at the restoration of the works of Mr. Abraham Cowley, 1674. Cowley was a prolific poet, essayist, a commentator, I guess, during the 17th century. He was a royalist, and when Cromwell came to power, Cowley actually fled to France and sort of was in the court of the exiled Queen during the period of Republican England, and after the Restoration came back and just did a lot of writing. He died in 1667, and in 1669 his works were gathered posthumously and printed, and these works were subject to a bunch of reprints over the next sort of 10 years or so, as more of his works were found and incorporated and so on. So what you have here is basically an enormous collection of essays and poems and so on and so forth. There's a big discourse in here, for example, on the government of Oliver Cromwell, as well as a lot of religious commentary and, as I said, poems. So very, very famous poet for his time. This book, what makes this interesting? I mean, this book cost me $52, and you could find one in better condition online for maybe about 500. But what makes this really interesting and worthy of restoration, in addition to just the book itself, is the history of its previous owners. So we have a couple of book plates here. This first one here, and I need to just, because my eyesight's very poor these days, just need to get closer. So this is Howard Wilford Bell. He was an author in his own right a little over 100 years ago. So this is from around the year 1900, I assume 1901 actually, probably from that date there. But what's really interesting is this, George Nugent. So if you look very closely at this book plate, you'll see the word d'écrivain. George Nugent was born in 1757, and he was he fought in the American War of Independence on the British side. He was a Brit, and so his early years were spent in the sort of army. But later on in life, he actually became very senior in British society and in the British Empire. So whereas in the previous restoration, we were dealing with an American hero, Edmund Lovell Dana, with this book, we're dealing with one of the most prolific British colonists, I suppose. And, one of the key roles that he was appointed to was in 1801, I believe. Nugent became the governor of Jamaica. So this guy was absolutely sat on the opposite side of the work of, say, Grenville Sharp. Grenville Sharp was an abolitionist, worked to remove slavery from the British Empire. I suspect, unfortunately, George Nugent was probably one of its biggest, although I've no evidence he was a slave directly. I suspect he certainly supported the structures of slavery through his governorship of Jamaica. He rose in seniority, became a member of Parliament for 14 years for the town of Buckingham in the centre of England. He also became very senior in the military, looking after the Western District of England and then the Kent District in England. And finally, his role was Commander-in-Chief in India. So, once again, very, very senior figure in the British Empire. He actually lived until 1849, so 92 years is a very, very long time for someone born in the mid-18th century to actually live. What was interesting was He became a baronet, and around the year 1807, by getting a baronet, I learnt a little bit about heraldry here. If a shield actually has mythical creatures to the side of it, which the sort of British crest would do, I mean, the crest of the royal family in England has a lion on one side and a unicorn on the other. That means it's been given the royal warrant, which means its owner basically is a person of note. There'll be a peer or a baron or a duke or some kind of lord. This crest actually lacks the two mythical creatures to the side. It just has a shield, which basically says this book was in Nugent's possession probably at the end of the 18th century. So, because it was before he was a baronet. So, you know, sometime between the American Revolutionary War and the turn of the century was when this book was in his possession. And this book was 1674, so it was probably about 100 years old when it ended up in Nugent's library. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about the condition of the book. So, as you can see, we've got two boards detached. What's different about this book versus the state that General Dana's book was in is that the text block's actually in reasonably good condition. So we're not going to need to sort of take apart the text block and build a loom and sort of re-sew it. You know, the pages themselves are reasonably robust. They get a little sort of fragile at the beginning and end, but overall, you know, we're in pretty good condition here. If we look at the spine and line it up against the boards themselves, so the first thing to say is, look, we've got some falsies going on. These are not genuine raised bands. They are just bits of rope that have been stuck in place. The actual binding points of the boards to the text block you can actually see here, and they're not aligned. So basically, there, for example, let's just make sure I've got this the right way around. Yes, I have. Yeah, there we go. So you can see a bit of sort of twine there attached to that dent here, here, here. So the actual attachment points of these boards don't coincide with these bands. So these bands are falsies. The actual real bands are actually buried underneath the leather at these points here. Nevertheless, we do have these compartments. Now the leather itself is very degraded, but we do just have the remnants of a label there. There's no harm in me seeing if maybe we can preserve that. We'll see whether it survives removal. But the key thing that I want to draw out here is just the condition of the boards themselves, because we had some key lessons learned, I think, from this restoration. So this guy here was restored with the paper going straight on over some leather that was underneath this. Not this leather, but a much poorer quality leather that's buried under here. And you can see it's actually very smooth and nice. If you'll recall from the General Dana series of videos that we did, these boards were in terrible condition, and what we had to do was to actually put multiple layers of paper, basically binder's copies of pages, on here to build the surface up and stabilize it, and then we put the marbled paper on top. And what appeared to happen was that the board actually warped a little bit. It sort of soaked up the moisture of the glue and so on. And we actually have this rippling here in the paper, which, you know, aesthetically is not a big deal. But what's interesting is the rippling isn't something that sort of disappears when you put pressure on. It's actually the structure of the board itself has rippled a little bit. And the lesson there for me was that if you let moisture get into this material, it can behave in unexpected ways. So what I think I'm going to have to do is, when we restore this, I'm going to this time leave this leather underneath. It does, however, leave us with what on earth are we going to do with this? As you can see, it's very, very badly sort of degraded. So I think one of the key challenges of this restoration is going to be, can we actually rebuild this in such a way that it looks seamless compared to this leather, but when we compact it, we can compact it and we actually get something that's basically the same thickness, because here you've got, you know, a reasonably thick, robust piece of card, but here it's so degraded and multiple layers are lost. This is actually a lot thinner than this, you see, and it's just really just falling apart. So this could be quite a challenge in terms of how we put that back together. It's a similar story on the edge of the board where the twine is, the board's actually broken here, there. This twine's, I mean, it's just completely failed. You've got you can see the twine buried elsewhere, as you can see there. So for me, I think the big restoration challenge is going to be, is it possible to save and stabilize the boards? We do want to preserve these book plates, and interestingly, if I just tweak it slightly, it looks as though the book plate may be a little loose, see that? So one option might be, it's high risk, but do we want to actually see if we can peel the book plate off? I don't know, it might be risky. Failing that, do we want to take off just the top layer of the board, transfer the book plates, and maybe just bring in a brand new board if we have to, if rebuilding this isn't successful. So the boards are going to be where the challenge is at. I mean, what we do after that is going to be, very similar to what we've done in previous restorations. We'll put some new raised bands here that actually are structural and tied into the text block, and we can tie into the boards, in the same place as the original ones are here. Nice piece of leather here. We'll get some nice marble paper here. Quarter leather there. We'll have to choose a leather to do that with. The other thing as well is, this is quite a tall book. It's actually taller than this one, which means it's too big for me to use my usual stockpile of 18th century leather, and it's also too tall for me to use the remnant of this paper. So we're going to have to select some leather from the bag of scraps, and we're going to have to purchase a brand new marbling or some kind of paper to cover the main parts of the board. So there we go. This book is, it's a very, very attractive book in this way, and Cowley was an important poet. So I'm looking forward to restoring this, and we'll see where this goes.